Welcome to Uncloseted Conversations. Even if you stumbled upon this channel by accident, you are welcome here. The stories here are from my heart, from my soul, from my pen to your ears. I hope that you will stay a little longer and open yourself to the magic of storytelling. Here I write fiction, and though not always aligning with reality, it still tugs at heartstrings. Stories are escapes and sometimes a balm to the soul. So, enjoy your time here, and if reality presses down too loud and too hard, come knock at the door, come in, take a seat, grab a coffee, and just exhale. These are veil-bound stories, and the space is free and non-judgmental. Sit back, earphones or pods in, and let's listen to another exquisite romance. Glass House, Clayfield. The Ice Queen finally met her match. And she didn't come from a boardroom. Chapter 1. Our Deepest Fear. I arrived just as the team began their warm-ups for the final game of the season. My sister's voice echoed in my head, a warning I hadn't taken seriously enough until now. Alina, you absolutely have to see this woman. The kids are smitten, and quite frankly, so am I. She'd held a hand over her mouth, whispering the last part with a wink. Don't tell Mike. My sister Melina and I are twins, not identical, but close enough that we share a certain shorthand. When her 16-year-old son, Marcus, started playing baseball, she was elated. Naturally, I had to be there. Marcus is my godson. I never miss his milestones, whether they are academic or athletic. The late afternoon sun was harsh, but the energy on the field was hotter. Marcus's team had been through the gauntlet, winning home and away games alike, and now they stood at the precipice, the state championships. I'd been out of the country for most of the season. During my brief stints back in the States, I'd heard endless chatter about the new coach and how badass she was. Call it curiosity or family loyalty, but I wanted to see the woman who had transformed my nephew's team. I spotted Melina and her husband, Mike, sitting near the dugout. The team was assembled nearby, gathered in a semicircle around the water coolers. I started toward my sister, but then I saw her. The world didn't just slow down, it paused. My heart skipped a beat, and my feet suddenly forgot their basic functions. She stood in the center of the boys, dressed in sharp black slacks and a white button-down, unbuttoned just enough to make a person's gaze linger. Her honey blonde hair was caught in a haphazard, messy bun, a few stray strands framing a face that looked like it was carved from marble. Then she looked up. Our eyes met. I used to roll my eyes when women claimed their bodies seized or their mouths went dry in the presence of someone beautiful. Bullshit, I'd always called it. But God have mercy, I was experiencing all of it. My face heated up like the Arizona desert. I am Alina Starkov. I am the CEO of one of the most powerful tech companies in the world. I don't do speechless, and I certainly don't do fuzzy. My emotions are cold, precise, and calculated. Melina is the emotional one, the one married with 2 kids. I am single by choice, with 0 interest in attachments. Yet, for the first time in 34 years, my internal systems were offline. She held my gaze for exactly 5 seconds, long enough to acknowledge me, short enough to dismiss me, and then returned her attention to the team. 12 boys waited breathlessly for her to speak, and I was right there with them. I forced my leaden limbs to move and sank into the seat next to Melina. A heavy silence fell over the field. Then she spoke. Her voice was a low, resonant cello, the kind of sound that keeps you awake in the dead of night. God, Alina, you're pathetic, I scolded myself. She began to quote one of my favorite writers, Marianne Williamson. Our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure, she said, her voice carrying across the diamond. It is our light, not our darkness, that most frightens us. We ask ourselves, who am I to be brilliant, gorgeous, talented, fabulous? Actually, who are you not to be? She paced the semicircle, her presence commanding an almost seductive level of respect. Your playing small does not serve the world. There is nothing enlightened about shrinking so that other people won't feel insecure around you. She looked around at the boys, then shifted her eyes slightly toward the stands. I felt a jolt of electricity. She can speak with that confidence in my bed anytime. I nearly choked on my own breath. I was drooling over a stranger whose name I didn't even know. I glanced at Melina quickly, worried my thoughts were thundering loud enough for her to hear. I shifted uncomfortably, clearing my throat and forcing my lips into something resembling a smile. The goddess continued, but she lifted her eyes again. This time, I was certain she was talking to me. I am quoting Williamson not because I think I am better than anyone, but to let you know that you can be great, if not the greatest. But that is up to you. Whether you just hear the words or actually practice them. She paused, her gaze intense. When you stand and rise, people around you will do the same. You won't just liberate yourself, you'll liberate the world around you. So, what is your greatest fear if you already have the answers inside you? Believe that you can. Believe that you've already won because you showed up. Now, go out there and show them why you're meant to be here today. The crowd erupted. Thunderous applause drowned out the umpire's whistle. Melina leaned over, beaming. Isn't she amazing? I nodded like an idiot, suddenly very busy digging through my handbag for nothing in particular. Out of the corner of my eye, I watched the coach stand like an imposing gatekeeper. My eyes trailed from her rigid spine down to her strong, athletic legs. What the hell, Alina? I scolded myself again. I pulled out my phone, desperate for a distraction, but it was hopeless. Her eyes were engraved in my mind, those storm gray eyes that seemed to look straight into my soul. Chapter 2: Run Like Hell. The game was a blur of cheering and dust. When the announcer called the bottom half of the inning, the pressure in my chest became too much to ignore. I leaned over to Melina, my voice tight. I just remembered, I have a Tokyo call I can't miss. I'll call you tomorrow. Before she could protest, I bolted for the gate. I kept my eyes fixed on the exit, forcing myself not to look back at the dugout or the woman commanding it. I reached my car and collapsed into the driver's seat. I didn't start the engine. I just sat there, my hands trembling slightly on the steering wheel, waiting for my heart to remember how to beat at a normal pace. The leather of the steering wheel felt cool against my palms, but my skin was still humming. I stared through the windshield, watching the dust kick up from the diamond in the distance. Get it together, Starkov. I started the engine, the familiar purr of the high-end motor usually enough to soothe me. Not today. Today, it felt like a getaway car. I drove home in a trance, the Tokyo conference call a complete lie I'd told to escape the gravitational pull of a woman in a messy bun. That night, sleep was a battlefield. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard that voice, powerful beyond measure. I woke up at 4 a.m., frustrated and craving caffeine. By Monday morning, I was back in my glass-walled office, 40 stories above the city. I was the shark. I was the predator. I fired off emails, tore through quarterly projections, and shredded a subpar marketing proposal. I was fine. I was normal. Then my phone buzzed. It was a text from Melina. Melina, celebration dinner for the state champs tonight. 7 p.m. at Tony's Pizza. Coach Griffiths is coming. You have to be there. Marcus won't stop asking for his favorite aunt. My thumb hovered over the screen. I should say no. I had a board meeting to prepare for. I had a life that didn't involve pizza parlors and high school sports. I'll be there. Don't make a big deal out of it. Tony's Pizza was loud, smelled of yeast and cheap beer, and was currently crawling with 16-year-old boys with bottomless stomachs. I arrived late, wearing a charcoal power suit that cost more than most of the cars in the parking lot. I felt like a sore thumb, but I leaned into it. If I couldn't be invisible, I'd be formidable. Alina. Over here. Melina waved me down from a long cluster of joined tables. I made my way over, nodding to Mike and ruffling Marcus's hair. Great game, kid. I saw that catch in the fourth. Thanks, Auntie A. Did you meet Coach yet? Marcus pointed toward the end of the table. My breath hitched. Rowan was there, stripped of her coaching whistle, but none of her gravity. She was wearing a simple gray Henley, the sleeves pushed up to reveal forearms that looked like they were made of corded steel. She was listening to one of the parents, her expression polite but guarded. "Alina, this is Rowan Griffiths," Melina said, far too brightly. "Rowan, this is my sister, Alina Starkov. She's the one who's always too busy flying across the globe." Rowan turned. Up close, those storm gray eyes weren't just intense, they were analytical. She stood up, she was tall, nearly matching my own height, and extended a hand. "The CEO," Rowan said. Her voice was lower than I remembered, vibrating right through my ribs. "I've seen your face on a few magazine covers in the airport." I took her hand. Her grip was firm, her skin warm and slightly calloused. It was the hand of someone who worked for a living, a stark contrast to my manicured fingers. "Don't believe everything you read, Coach," I managed, my voice miraculously steady. "Though I hope the articles mentioned I have an appreciation for a well-run team. You've done wonders with them." Rowan didn't let go of my hand immediately. She held it for a beat too long, her gaze scanning my face as if she were looking for a crack in the ice. "They're good kids," she said softly, her eyes narrowing. "As long as they don't get distracted by things that don't happen on the field." I felt the challenge in her words. She wasn't just talking about the boys. She was reminding me, and perhaps herself, of the boundary she'd drawn. The no fraternizing rule was practically radiating off her. "Distractions are only dangerous if you aren't disciplined enough to handle them," I countered, tilting my chin up. A small, almost imperceptible smirk tugged at the corner of her mouth. "Is that right? And are you disciplined, Miss Starkov?" "I built an empire on discipline." "Well," Rowan said, finally releasing my hand and stepping back into her fortress of silence. "An empire is a long way from a baseball diamond. Out here, the rules are a bit more rigid." She sat back down, effectively ending the conversation. I stood there, my hand still tingling, feeling like I'd just stepped into a cage with something that didn't care about my title or my net worth. The crack in my armor wasn't just hidden anymore. It was starting to ache. Chapter 3: The Iron Curtain. The following Saturday morning was arguably too early for anyone to be awake, let alone standing in a dusty field. I stood by the bleachers, clutching a venti espresso like a lifeline. I was wearing oversized designer sunglasses, partly for the glare, but mostly so I could stare at Rowan Griffiths without anyone being the wiser. From 10 yards away, she was a study in controlled motion. She was hitting ground balls to the infield, her swing fluid and powerful. Every time the bat connected with the ball, the crack echoed in my chest. She looked different today. Focused. The messy bun was gone, replaced by a low ponytail tucked under a well-worn baseball cap. Perspiration made her gray t-shirt cling to the small of her back. "Stop it, Alina," I told myself, taking a blistering sip of coffee. "You have a merger to finalize on Monday. You do not have time to wonder what she looks like without the cap." I adjusted my posture, smoothing out my silk blouse and regaining my CEO composure. To the other parents, I was the intimidating, untouchable Alina Starkov. But behind the dark lenses, I was devastatingly human. I watched the way Rowan's jaw tightened when she gave instructions, the way she didn't just walk, she prowled the dirt. The view from the dugout. On the field, Rowan felt the weight of a gaze she couldn't see. She knew exactly where the Starkov woman was standing. It was impossible not to. Even in a casual setting, Alina radiated a cold, expensive energy that made the air feel thinner. Rowan spat in the dirt and adjusted her glove, her heart doing a frantic little skip she despised. "Rule number 1, Griffiths, you don't look at the families. You definitely don't look at the ones who look like they belong on a runway." She remembered the feeling of Alina's hand from the pizza parlor, soft, but with a surprising strength. It had been a long time since a touch had made her want to lower her guard, and that was exactly why she had to double down. The last time she'd let a distraction into her life, it had ended in a shattered career and a heart that took 3 years to stop aching. She wasn't going through that again. Not for a high-powered CEO who probably viewed people as assets to be acquired. Again, Rowan barked, her voice sharper than usual. Marcus, your feet are heavy. Move M or lose M. She didn't look toward the bleachers. She couldn't. If she saw those ice blue eyes watching her, she wasn't sure her no fraternizing policy would survive the inning. The breaking point. The practice ended an hour later. As the boys headed for the parking lot, Melina caught my arm. I forgot the sign-up sheet for the end-of-season banquet, Melina hissed. Alina, the doll? Rowan is by the equipment shed. Just go grab it from her. I have to catch Marcus before he leaves his cleats in the grass again. Before I could protest, before I could explain that my Ice Queen persona was currently melting into a puddle of nerves, Melina was gone. I turned toward the equipment shed. Rowan was there, lugging a heavy bag of balls over her shoulder. The muscles in her arms flexed with the effort, and I felt my throat go dry. I walked over, my heels clicking on the pavement, each step feeling like a march toward a firing squad. Coach Griffiths. I called out. Rowan froze. She didn't turn around immediately. She took a breath, squared her shoulders, and then faced me. Up close, without the barrier of the fence, she looked exhausted and magnificent. Miss Starkov, she said, her voice clipped. Practice is over. If this is about Marcus's playtime. It's not, I interrupted, my professional mask snapping back into place. I couldn't let her see the effect she had on me. My sister sent me for the banquet sheet. Apparently, she's misplaced her ability to keep track of paperwork. Rowan stared at me. Just stared. The silence stretched between us, thick with everything we weren't saying. I could see the pulse jumping in her neck. She was struggling too. Right. The sheet, Rowan said, her voice dropping an octave. She reached into her back pocket, pulling out a folded piece of paper. As she handed it to me, our fingers brushed. It was a brief, accidental contact, but it felt like a live wire. She pulled her hand back as if she'd been burned, her expression hardening into a mask of granite. There you go, she said, her tone icy. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have work to do. Alone. She turned her back on me without another word. I stood there, clutching the paper, my heart hammering against my ribs. She wasn't just closed off, she was a fortress. And for the first time in my life, I wanted to stage a siege. Chapter 4. The Art of the Deal. I sat in my office, the city lights shimmering like fallen diamonds below, but my mind was stuck on a dusty baseball field. I had the banquet sheet in my hand, but I wasn't looking at the names. I was thinking about the way Rowan Griffiths had looked at me, like I was a problem she couldn't coach her way out of. I knew how to get what I wanted. In the tech world, I was a predator. If I wanted a company, I bought it. If I wanted a person's time, I paid for it. But Rowan? She'd probably spit on $1 million check if it came with strings attached. I buzzed my assistant. Sarah, find out the status of the Eastside Junior League's equipment and facilities. Everything. And don't just send me a PDF, I want to know what they're missing. 3 days later, I didn't show up in a limousine. I drove my SUV, the one I usually reserved for trips to the Hamptons, and parked it right next to Rowan's beat-up truck. She was in the dugout, cleaning the clay off a set of catcher's mitts. The afternoon sun caught the gold in her hair, and for a moment, my Ice Queen mask slipped. I just stood there, watching the rhythmic, calloused movement of her hands. If you're here to talk about the banquet again, the deadline hasn't moved, Rowan said without looking up. Her voice was like gravel and velvet. I'm not here about the chicken piccata, Coach Griffiths, I said, stepping into the shade of the dugout. The smell of old leather and sweat hit me. It was raw, honest, and entirely her. She finally looked up, her storm gray eyes narrowed. Then what? Marcus forgot his helmet. The batting cages are rusted. The pitching machine sounds like a lawnmower from 1985. And the boys are wearing kits that have more patches than original fabric. I leaned against the dugout railing, crossing my arms. I'm prepared to fund a complete overhaul. New gear, professional-grade cages, and a sponsored travel budget for the regional qualifiers. Rowan stood up slowly, the rag in her hand dropping to the bench. Her jaw was set so tight I thought I heard it crack. "I don't take charity, Miss Starkov. This isn't a tax write-off for your conglomerate. These boys don't need to be branded by some tech giant to know how to play ball." "It's not charity. It's an investment," I countered, my voice dropping to that cold, boardroom register that usually made men twice her size tremble. "And I don't give a damn about the tax write-off. I care about my godson having equipment that doesn't give him a tetanus shot every time he slides into home." Rowan stepped into my space. She was close, so close I could smell the faint scent of laundry detergent and something earthy, like rain on hot pavement. She was trying to intimidate me. She didn't realize that in my world, I was the intimidation. "You think you can just swoop in, write a check, and buy your way into the soul of this game?" she hissed. "I know I can't," I said, holding her gaze, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. "That's why I'm not just writing a check. I'm joining the fundraising committee. I'll be here every Saturday to help organize the auction and the equipment rollout. If you want the best for these kids, you're going to have to deal with me. Frequently." Rowan's eyes widened. She searched my face, looking for the lie, the hidden agenda. But all she found was my own stubbornness. "You," she scoffed, though the edges of her voice were fraying. "The woman who wears $400 silk to a dirt field is going to help haul crates of equipment?" "I'm sturdier than I look, coach," I whispered. She didn't move. We were locked in a stalemate, the air between us thick enough to choke on. I watched her eyes flicker down to my lips for a fraction of a second, a tiny, microscopic crack in her armor, before she wrenched her gaze away. "Fine," Rowan snapped, turning back to the gear. "Saturday, 8 a.m. where something you don't mind getting ruined. If you're 1 minute late, the deal is off." "I'm never late," I said, turning to walk away. I made it halfway to my car before I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. My hands were shaking. I had just committed to 40 hours of manual labor in the heat, all for the chance to be in her orbit. I was Alina Starkov. I was powerful. I was brilliant. And I was absolutely, hopelessly compromised. Chapter 5: Heavy Lifting. Saturday morning arrived with a crispness that did nothing to cool the fire in my nerves. I stood in front of my walk-in closet, staring at my options. I couldn't wear my usual suit, but I wasn't about to show up in a baggy tracksuit like a shapeless ghost. I settled on a pair of high-performance black leggings and a tight, racerback compression top. It was practical, gym gear I used for my daily 5 a.m. sessions with my personal trainer. I pulled my platinum hair back into a sleek, high ponytail and grabbed a pair of pristine white sneakers. I looked like a woman ready for a marathon or a fight. I wasn't sure which one I was walking into. When I pulled up to the equipment shed at 7:55 a.m., the sun was just beginning to bake the dew off the grass. Rowan was already there, leaning against the corrugated metal wall with a clipboard in one hand and a thermos in the other. She was wearing a pair of faded denim shorts and a tank top that showed off the intricate, powerful landscape of her shoulders. She looked up as I stepped out of the SUV, and for the first time since I'd met her, she actually stopped breathing. Her eyes traveled from my sneakers, up the length of my legs, and settled on the exposed skin of my shoulders. Her grip on the clipboard tightened until her knuckles turned white. "You're early," she said, her voice sounding like it had been dragged over sandpaper. "I told you. I'm never late." I walked toward her, the gravel crunching under my feet. I didn't miss the way her gaze flickered to the muscle definition in my arms. "Where do we start, coach?" Rowan cleared her throat, shaking herself out of whatever trance she'd fallen into. She pointed toward the back of a flatbed truck parked nearby. It was loaded with heavy, industrial-grade steel poles for the new batting cages. "The delivery guy dropped these off at the gate because the truck couldn't clear the grass," she said, her tone regaining its defensive edge. "They need to be moved to the far end of the diamond. I was going to wait for the maintenance crew, but if you're so sturdy, you can help me." She was testing me. She expected me to complain about the weight, or the dirt, or the fact that I might break a nail. "Lead the way," I said. We walked to the truck in silence. The first pole was 6 feet of solid, galvanized steel. Rowan reached for one end, and I gripped the other. "On 3, she said. 1, 2. We lifted in unison. I felt the weight settle into my heels, my core engaging automatically. I wasn't some delicate flower. I spent 4 days a week deadlifting more than most men in my office. Rowan's eyes widened as she felt me take my half of the weight without a single grunt of effort. "You've done this before," she muttered as we began to walk across the grass. "I don't just sit behind a desk all day, Coach Griffiths. I like to be capable." We moved back and forth from the truck to the diamond for an hour. The sun climbed higher, and the work became a rhythmic dance. My skin was glistening with sweat, and I could feel my ponytail dampening against my neck. Every time we set a pole down, our hands would inevitably brush, or our shoulders would knock together. The air between us was thick with the scent of sun-warmed skin and the electric charge of proximity. On the final pole, we both slipped slightly in a patch of soft mud. Rowan reached out to steady me, her hand gripping my bicep. The heat of her palm seared through my skin. I looked up, and we were inches apart. I could see the flecks of darker charcoal in her gray eyes. I could see the way her chest was heaving from the exertion. And for the first time, I saw the hidden crack I'd been looking for. It wasn't just attraction. It was a deep, terrifying vulnerability. "You're a lot of things, Alina Starkov," she whispered, her hand lingering on my arm a second too long. "But you're not what I expected." I leaned in, just a fraction. "And what did you expect?" She looked down at my lips, and for a heartbeat, I thought she was going to lean in. Then, the sound of a car door slamming in the distance broke the spell. Rowan jumped back as if she'd been struck, her face closing up instantly. "I expected someone who wouldn't get their hands dirty," she said, her voice cold and distant again. She turned away, picking up her clipboard like a shield. "The boys will be here in 20 minutes. You should probably go clean up." I stood there in the mud, my heart thudding against my ribs, watching her retreat into her fortress. She was terrified of what was happening between us. And honestly, so was I. Chapter 6. The Twin Intuition. The Saturday afternoon sun was relentless as the fundraising committee, mostly a group of overcaffeinated parents, gathered around a cluster of picnic tables near the equipment shed. I sat at the end of the bench, my Ice Queen facade firmly back in place. I had changed into a fresh white linen shirt, but my muscles still hummed from the morning's exertion. I was meticulously reviewing the auction inventory on my tablet, looking every bit the detached billionaire. Across from me, Melina was supposed to be organizing the bake sale roster, but she hadn't looked at her notepad in 10 minutes. She was looking at me, then at Rowan, who was standing 20 feet away, arms crossed, overseeing a batting drill. Then back to me. "So," Melina said, her voice dropping into that low, twin-only frequency. "You're sweaty." "I was helping move steel poles, Melina." "It's called manual labor," I replied, not looking up from my screen. "Right. Manual labor. With the coach." Melina leaned in, a slow, dangerous smirk spreading across her face. "The coach who hasn't stopped glancing over here every 3 minutes. And the coach whose face turns a very interesting shade of red every time you adjust your hair." I finally looked up, my gaze as cold as I could muster. "She's likely just checking to see if I've ruined the equipment or if I'm about to demand a refund. We have a professional arrangement." "Alina, I shared a womb with you," Melina whispered, reaching across the table to tap my hand. "I know your professional face. This isn't it. Your pupils are dilated, your pulse is visible in your neck, and you're holding that tablet like you're trying to snap it in half." I tightened my grip on the device. "You're imagining things. I am here for Marcus." "Uh-huh." Melina leaned back, her eyes twinkling. "Then explain why, when Rowan slipped in the mud earlier, you didn't just stand there and judge her like you do everyone else?" Mike told me he saw you too. Stabilizing each other. He said the air was practically vibrating. Mike should focus on his batting average and less on my social interactions, I snapped. Just then, Rowan walked toward the table. The conversation around us died down. Even among the parents, Rowan had a way of sucking all the oxygen out of the room. She looked at the committee, her face a mask of granite, but her eyes landed on me for a fraction of a second too long. "We need the final count for the uniform order by Tuesday, Miss Starkov," Rowan said, her voice stiff. "If your investment is going to cover the home and away kits, I need the sizes." "I'll have the data sent to you by end of business Monday, Coach Griffiths," I replied, my voice perfectly level, the quintessential CEO. Rowan nodded once, a sharp, jerky movement. She turned to leave, but her foot caught on the edge of the table leg. It was a tiny, human stumble, completely unlike her usual grace. She recovered instantly, but I saw the flush of embarrassment creep up her neck before she marched back to the field. The silence at the table was deafening until Melina let out a low, melodic whistle. "Professional arrangement, my sister's ass," Melina muttered, scribbling something on her notepad. "She's terrified of you. And you? You're absolutely smitten. This is going to be the most entertaining season of my life." "There is nothing to be entertained by," I said, rising from the bench. I needed to leave before Melina started picking apart the rest of my composure. "I have a conference call. I'll see you at home." As I walked toward my car, I felt Melina's eyes on my back, but more importantly, I felt Rowan's. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. Because Melina was right, the Ice Queen wasn't just melting. She was starting to burn. Chapter 7. The Blizzard. Back at Starkov Industries, the atmosphere was no longer just professional, it was lethal. I sat in my corner office, the floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city I usually dominated. But for 5 days, the city had looked like a blur of gray and honey blonde. "The marketing team is waiting in the boardroom," Miss Starkov, my assistant, Sarah, said through the intercom. Her voice was trembling. I had already sent 3 drafts back this morning, each with red digital ink that looked like a crime scene. "Tell them they have 5 minutes to find a spine and a better strategy," I snapped, closing a spreadsheet I hadn't actually been reading. I was a blizzard. Every time I tried to focus on the merger, I saw the flex of Rowan's shoulders as she lifted those steel poles. Every time I looked at a contract, I heard her voice. "Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure." It was infuriating. I was a woman of logic, of cold, hard data. And yet, my brain kept replaying a 3-second loop of Rowan's thumb brushing against my bicep. I walked into the boardroom, my heels clicking like a countdown to an explosion. The marketing directors went silent. "This campaign is soft," I said, tossing the tablet onto the mahogany table. "It's playing small. It's shrinking so the competition doesn't feel insecure." I froze. I was quoting her. I was using the words of a high school baseball coach to dictate a multi-million-dollar tech launch. "Miss Starkov," the head of marketing asked, blinking in confusion. "Is everything all right?" "Everything is fine," I hissed, my eyes flashing a warning that silenced the room. "The campaign is mediocre. Redo it. I want it to be powerful beyond measure by tomorrow morning." Dismissed. I retreated to my office and slammed the door. I leaned my forehead against the cool glass of the window, closing my eyes. "Get out of my head, Rowan." But she didn't. Instead, the image of her in those faded denim shorts, standing in the mud with a look of terrifying vulnerability, dug its heels into my subconscious. I was 34 years old. I had built an empire. I didn't get crushes. I didn't lose my focus over a woman who probably owned more baseballs than high heels. My phone buzzed on my desk. I hoped it was a crisis, a server crash, a hostile takeover, anything I could fight. It was a text from an unknown number. "Unknown. The uniform order is finalized. I've sent the invoice to your assistant. Also, Marcus mentioned you're the one who taught him how to handle pressure. I can see the influence. R. Griffiths." I stared at the screen, my breath catching. It wasn't an invitation. It wasn't even friendly. It was a cold, professional acknowledgement. But the fact that she had bothered to mention my influence on Marcus, that she had seen a piece of me in the boy she coached, felt like a breach in my hull. I didn't reply. I couldn't. I tossed the phone into my desk drawer and locked it. I was Alina Starkov. I was an ice blizzard. And if I couldn't freeze this feeling out, I was going to burn the whole world down trying to ignore it. Chapter 8. The Boardroom Diamond. I decided the next fundraising meeting wouldn't be held at a pizza parlor or a dusty field. I moved it to the executive conference room on the 40th floor of Starkov Towers. If I was going to be forced to deal with these feelings, I wanted the home field advantage. The parents, Melina and Mike included, looked like they'd stepped onto another planet as they were ushered through the glass doors by my security detail. They were dressed in polo shirts and jeans, looking small against the minimalist black marble and the sweeping views of the skyline. Then, there was Rowan. She walked in last. She was wearing a simple black blazer over a charcoal tee, her hair pulled back so tight it emphasized the sharp, dangerous lines of her face. She didn't look impressed by the view. She looked like she was walking into a trap. "Please have a seat," I said, my voice projecting with the practiced authority that had leveled competitors in 3 continents. I didn't stand up. I stayed behind the head of the table, my hands steepled, my expression a mask of polished granite. "Miss Starkov," Rowan said, her voice a low vibration that seemed to bounce off the soundproof glass. She sat at the very end of the table, as far away from me as possible. "Nice office. A bit cold, isn't it?" "Efficiency often is," I replied, clicking a remote. The wall-sized screen flickered to life, showing a complex breakdown of the auction's projected revenue, donor tiers, and logistical timelines. For the next hour, I ran that meeting like a military operation. I cut off a parent who started rambling about cupcake flavors with a single look. I delegated tasks with the precision of a surgeon. I was cold, I was fast, and I was utterly untouchable. I could feel Rowan watching me. Not the way she watched me in the mud, this was different. She was studying the CEO version of me, the one that didn't stumble, didn't sweat, and didn't have fuzzy emotions. I glanced at her, expecting to see disdain. Instead, I saw a flicker of something that looked like recognition. It was the look of one soldier recognizing another's scars. "We're short on the silent auctions, big-ticket item," Melina noted, her eyes darting between us, sensing the drop in temperature. "We need something that appeals to the high rollers." "I've already handled it," I said, my voice clipped. "I'm donating a week at my villa in Lake Como, including private airfare. It should bring in enough to cover the rest of the stadium lights." The room erupted in whispers. Even Rowan's stoic mask slipped for a second. "That's a lot of money, Miss Starkov," Rowan said, her voice cutting through the chatter. "Why go that far for a junior league?" "Because I don't believe in playing small, coach," I said, throwing her own words back at her. "I thought you of all people would appreciate that." Our eyes locked across the long expanse of the mahogany table. The parents around us became white noise. In that moment, the power dynamic shifted. I wasn't just a godson's aunt anymore. I was a titan in her temple of glass. "Meeting adjourned," I announced. The parents scrambled to leave, clearly intimidated by the environment. Melina lingered for a second, giving me a knowing look and a wink before Mike pulled her toward the elevator. Finally, it was just the two of us. Rowan didn't leave. She stood up, her tall frame casting a long shadow across the polished floor. She walked toward my desk, her boots silent on the expensive rug. She stopped on the other side of the glass, looking out at the city. "You're a different person up here," she said softly. "This is who I am, Rowan." The woman in the mud was a temporary lapse in branding. Rowan turned to face me. The Ice Queen facade I'd worked so hard to maintain all week began to crack under the weight of her gaze. "I think the woman in the mud is the one who scares you the most," Rowan countered. She stepped closer, her hands resting on the edge of my desk. Because up here, you can control everything. Out there, you're just like the rest of us. Vulnerable. I am never vulnerable, I whispered, though my heart was betraying me, thudding against my ribs like a trapped bird. Liar, Rowan breathed. She reached out, her hand hovering just inches from mine on the desk. She didn't touch me, but the heat radiating from her skin was enough to make my vision blur. I have a rule, Alina, she said, her voice dropping to a jagged whisper. I don't do this. I don't get close to people like you. I've seen what happens when powerful people get bored with their investments. I'm not bored, I said, my voice trembling for the first time in years. And I'm not an investment. Rowan stared at me, her storm gray eyes searching mine for the lie. Then, she pulled her hand back, curling it into a fist. Stay in your tower, Miss Starkov, she said, her voice regaining its iron. It's safer for both of us. She turned and walked out, the heavy glass doors clicking shut behind her. I sat there in the silence of my empire, the Ice Queen defeated by a woman who didn't even have to touch me to make me melt. Chapter 9. Black Tie. The following week was an exercise in mutual avoidance and silent warfare. I buried myself in the merger, working 18-hour days until my eyes burned. Every time my phone buzzed, a traitorous part of me hoped it was her. Every time it wasn't, I felt a sharp, cold jab of disappointment. I was at war with my own biology. I was Alina Starkov, I didn't long for things. I acquired them, or I moved past them. But Rowan Griffiths was an itch under my skin that no amount of corporate success could scratch. Rowan, for her part, had become a ghost. She communicated only through Melina, sending sterile, bulleted lists of auction requirements and seating charts. She was retreating into her fortress, reinforcing the walls I had dared to chip at. Then came Friday night, the Eastside Junior League Gala. The venue was an opulent ballroom draped in velvet and bathed in amber light. It was my world, gold-leafed and expensive, but tonight it felt like a cage. I stood before the mirror in the dressing room, smoothing the silk of my dress. It was emerald green, a color that made my ice blue eyes look like frozen oceans. The fabric was a second skin, stitched to my curves with a precision that left nothing to the imagination. It was my armor of choice, elegant, intimidating, and flawlessly expensive. If you stare at yourself any harder, the mirror's going to crack, Melina said, stepping into the room. She was in a simple navy gown, looking at me with a mix of awe and concern. You look like you're going to war, Ollie. In a way, I am, I murmured, adjusting a diamond earring. We made our entrance, and the room tilted on its axis. I moved through the crowd, shaking hands and nodding at donors, the Ice Queen back on her throne. But my internal compass was spinning, searching for one specific frequency. And then I saw her. The breath left my lungs so suddenly I felt dizzy. Rowan Griffiths was standing by the champagne tower, and she had utterly decimated my expectations. She wasn't in slacks. She wasn't in a cap. She was wearing a floor-length, backless gown of midnight black that clung to the powerful lines of her body. The dress featured a slit that climbed daringly high, revealing the toned, athletic legs I'd admired in the dirt. But it was her face, framed by soft curls instead of a messy bun, and the way she stood in 3-inch heels with the same commanding grace she used on the field that floored me. She looked like a goddess of the hunt dressed for a masquerade. Our eyes met across the expanse of the ballroom. The socialites and the noise faded into a blur of static. Rowan didn't look away this time. She watched me approach, her gray eyes darkening as they traced the emerald silk stitched to my frame. "Coach," I said, my voice barely a whisper when I reached her. "You look different." "So do you," she replied. Her voice was a low, dangerous thrum that bypassed my brain and went straight to my pulse. She took a slow sip of champagne, her gaze never leaving mine. I almost didn't recognize the woman from the equipment shed. "Is that a compliment, Rowan?" "It's an observation," she countered, though her hand trembled slightly as she set her glass down. I didn't think you could get any more imposing. I was wrong. You're wearing heels, I noted, stepping a fraction closer, letting the scent of my perfume mingle with the air between us. I thought you preferred the dirt. Sometimes the occasion calls for a different kind of footing, she said, her voice dropping an octave. She looked around the opulent room, then back to me, her expression turning guarded. Is this what you wanted, Alina? To see me in your world? To see if I'd fit? I wanted to see you, I confessed, the truth slipping through the cracks of my resolve. Just you. The setting is irrelevant. The no fraternizing policy was hanging between us like a thin glass wall, vibrating with the pressure of what we weren't saying. I could see the battle in her eyes, the urge to run back to her fortress versus the raw, magnetic pull of the moment. The auction is starting, she whispered, her gaze dropping to my lips. You should go be the CEO. People are watching. Let them watch, I said, my heart hammering against the emerald silk. I reached out, my fingers grazing the bare skin of her arm. The contact was electric, a silent explosion in the middle of a crowded room. Rowan didn't pull away. Instead, she leaned in, her breath warm against my ear. If you don't stop looking at me like that, Alina, she breathed, I'm going to forget every reason I have to stay away from you. Chapter 10. The Price of Silence. The auctioneer's voice was a rhythmic drone, a sharp contrast to the thunder in my veins. I stood at the edge of the VIP section, the emerald silk of my dress feeling tighter with every breath. Rowan was standing against the far wall, a shadow in midnight black, watching the room with the wary eyes of a soldier behind enemy lines. Next up, the auctioneer announced, his voice booming through the speakers, is a truly unique experience. A private, one-on-one professional coaching clinic for 10, followed by a dinner hosted by our very own state champion coach, Rowan Griffiths. The room hummed with interest. A few local businessmen raised their paddles, joking about needing to fix their golf swings or wanting their kids to get ahead. The bidding climbed steadily, 5,000, 8,000, 10. I saw Rowan stiffen. She hated this, being paraded like a prize, her time sold to the highest bidder. She looked small for the first time, her shoulders tight under the weight of the spotlight. 12,000, a rival tech executive called out from the front row, throwing a smirk back at me. Something inside me snapped. It wasn't about the charity anymore. It was about the look on Rowan's face, the way she looked like she wanted the floor to swallow her whole. And it was about the fact that I couldn't stand the thought of anyone else buying her time. I didn't raise my paddle. I simply stood up, the emerald silk catching the light like a warning flare. 100,000, I said. The room went deathly silent. The auctioneer froze, his hammer hovering in midair. I'm sorry, Miss Starkov? Did you say 100,000? I don't like to repeat myself, I said, my voice cutting through the ballroom like a glacier. $100,000. For the coaching, the dinner, and the coach's undivided attention. I looked directly at Rowan. She was staring at me, her mouth slightly parted, her gray eyes wide with a mixture of shock and something that looked dangerously like fury. Going once, going twice, sold. To Alina Starkov. The applause was hesitant, confused. People were whispering, the Ice Queen's erratic behavior already becoming the scandal of the season. I didn't care. I turned and walked toward the terrace doors, the cool night air calling to me. I knew she would follow. Rowan Griffiths could never resist a challenge. The balcony was empty, the city lights shimmering below like a sea of static. I leaned against the stone balustrade, my hands trembling. The heavy glass doors swung open and slammed shut. What the hell was that? Rowan's voice was a low growl. She marched toward me, the slit in her black dress revealing the frantic stride of her legs. $100,000? You just bought me like I was a piece of hardware for your office, Alina. I didn't buy you, I said, turning to face her, the emerald silk shimmering in the moonlight. I bought them off. I couldn't watch them bid on you like you were a trophy. So you decided to be the biggest predator in the room? She stopped inches from me, her chest heaving, the scent of her perfume, something dark and spicy, overwhelming my senses. You just broke every boundary I have. Do you know what people are going to say? The Ice Queen and the coach. Let them talk, Rowan. I've spent my whole life worrying about my brand, my image, my empire. I stepped into her space, my heart hammering against my ribs. But for the last hour, all I've thought about is how much I wanted to get you alone. Rowan's anger seemed to falter, replaced by the raw, terrifying heat that had been building between us since the first day on the field. She looked down at me, her gray eyes searching mine. "You're a nightmare," she whispered, her hand reaching out, her fingers ghosting over the emerald silk at my waist. "And you're a distraction I can't afford," I breathed. Rowan didn't say another word. She closed the distance, her hand sliding up to cut my jaw, her thumb dragging across my lower lip. The no fraternizing rule didn't just break, it shattered. When she kissed me, it wasn't soft. It was the collision of two people who had spent too long pretending they didn't want to burn each other down. It tasted like champagne, salt, and the absolute end of my control. Chapter 11. The Witness. The morning sun was too bright, too judgmental. I had spent the night staring at the ceiling of my bedroom, the taste of champagne and Rowan still lingering on my lips. I was the CEO of a global empire, yet I felt like a teenager who had just set her own house on fire. I was reaching for my phone to call Melina, to get ahead of whatever storm was coming, when my intuition told me I was already too late. Rowan's apartment. Rowan sat at her kitchen island, a mug of black coffee clutched in both hands. She was back in her comfort zone, a pair of gray sweatpants and an oversized hoodie, her hair pulled into the familiar, messy bun. But the Ice Queen's kiss was still etched into her mind, a permanent brand on her resolve. The sharp, rhythmic pounding on her front door didn't sound like a delivery. It sounded like a Starkov. Rowan sighed, closing her eyes for a second before standing up. She opened the door to find Melina standing there, wearing a bright yellow sundress and a grin that was far too wide for 8 in the morning. "Do you usually let people finish their coffee before you stage a home invasion?" Rowan asked, her voice raspy. "Only people I'm not related to," Melina said, breezing past her into the minimalist, sun-drenched apartment. She looked around, nodding in approval at the clean lines and the view. "Nice place, coach. Very disciplined. Just like you. Except for that little performance on the balcony last night." Rowan froze, the hair on the back of her neck standing up. She slowly closed the door. "Melina." "Oh, don't Melina me," her twin laughed, spinning around to face her. "I went looking for my sister because she disappeared after dropping $100,000 on a coaching clinic, which, by the way, nice flex, and what do I find?" The coach and the CEO wrapped around each other like they were trying to merge into a single entity. Rowan rubbed a hand over her face, the heat of the memory making her cheeks flush. It was a mistake. A lapse in judgment. It won't happen again. A mistake. Melina hopped onto a bar stool, leaning her chin on her hand. "Rowan, I've seen my sister look at a lot of things. I've seen her look at billion-dollar contracts, her first Ferrari, and the New York skyline. I have never seen her look at anyone the way she looked at you last night. She looked hungry and terrified." Rowan stayed silent, her heart hammering. "She has a lot to lose, Melina. So do I. My career is built on a reputation of being untouchable. If the league finds out I'm involved with a parent—" "A godparent," Melina corrected with a wink. "Loophole. But seriously, Rowan, I'm not just here to make fun of you, though believe me, that's a huge part of it. I'm here because Alina doesn't know how to do this. She treats people like assets. She treats emotions like bugs in a software program. But you—" Melina's expression softened, the humor fading into something more protective. "You're the first person who's ever made her break her own rules. And I think you're just as scared as she is because you know she's not just a distraction. She's the blizzard that's going to knock your fortress down." Rowan looked away, staring out at the city. I've been hurt before, Melina. Deeply. I can't afford to let someone like Alina Starkov play with my life, because she's curious about how the other half lives. She's not curious, Melina said, standing up and walking toward the door. She's gone. Completely and utterly gone. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have to go to her office and see if I can make her blush during a board meeting. It's on my bucket list. As Melina reached for the handle, she paused. By the way, coach, you're a terrible liar. Your heart is practically thumping through that hoodie. The door clicked shut, leaving Rowan in the silence. She looked down at her hands. They were shaking. She had spent years building a wall that no one could climb. But Alina Starkov hadn't climbed it. She had simply bought the land it was built on and demanded an audience. Chapter 12. The Glass House. My penthouse was designed to be a fortress of glass and marble, minimalist, silent, and completely under my control. But as I stood in the kitchen, nursing a double espresso and staring out at the city, the silence felt deafening. My lips still felt scorched, and my mind was a chaotic loop of Rowan's hands on my waist. I was leaning against the counter, still in my silk robe, when the elevator gave a sharp ding. I didn't have to check the security monitor. Only one person had the override code and the audacity to use it at 8 a.m. on a Sunday. The doors slid open and Melina marched in. She wasn't wearing her gala gown anymore. She was in leggings and a baseball mom sweatshirt, carrying a box of donuts like a peace offering or a weapon. "You're late," I said, my voice projecting a coldness I didn't actually feel. "I assumed you'd be here at dawn to begin the interrogation." "I had to drop the kids at practice first," Melina said, tossing the donuts onto the marble island. She leaned against the counter, her eyes tracing the lines of my face with terrifying precision. "So, $100,000, Ollie? Even for you, that's a bit aggressive for a tax write-off." "It was a donation to a worthy cause," I replied, taking a slow, measured sip of my coffee. "A worthy cause with storm gray eyes and legs that go on for days?" Melina's grin was predatory. "I saw you, Alina. On the balcony. I want to find you after the bidding war, and I walked right into a scene from a romance novel I'm pretty sure you used to call illogical garbage." I felt the heat rise in my neck, a blush I couldn't suppress. I set my mug down with a sharp clack. It was a moment of high tension. The atmosphere of the gala, the adrenaline of the auction, it was a lapse in judgment. "A lapse?" Melina laughed, stepping closer. "You weren't just kissing her, Ollie. You were devouring her. And the best part? The stoic, no fraternizing Coach Griffiths was doing the exact same thing to you. She has rules, Melina. Policies. And I have a reputation to maintain." I turned away, looking out at the skyline. It can't happen again. It was a one-time release of pressure. "Liar," Melina sang, popping open the donut box. "You're already thinking about when that coaching clinic is going to happen. You bought her time, sister. You bought a week of her undivided attention. You think you're going to be able to sit through a private dinner with that woman and keep your ice queen crown on straight." "I am perfectly capable of maintaining my professional distance," I snapped. "You're shaking," Melina pointed out, nodding toward my hand on the counter. I pulled my hand away, clenching it into a fist. She's different. She doesn't care about the money. She doesn't care about the tower. She looked at me last night like she saw right through the emerald silk to the person underneath. It's infuriating. It's called being seen, Alina. It's what happens when you stop being a CEO for 5 minutes and let yourself be a woman." Melina's voice softened, the teasing dropping away. "But be careful. Rowan isn't one of your board members. She's been hurt. I can see it in the way she guards that team. If you're just doing this because you're bored, stop now." "I'm many things, Melina, but I am never bored with her," I whispered, the admission feeling like a crack in my foundation. "Good," Melina said, grabbing a donut and heading back toward the elevator. "Because she's downstairs at the field in 20 minutes for the junior varsity drills. You should probably go. Supervise your investment." The elevator doors closed, leaving me alone in my glass house. I looked at the city, then at my reflection in the window. The Ice Queen was still there, but her eyes, the eyes Rowan had kissed, looked like they were finally starting to thaw. I had $100,000 clinic to schedule. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't sure if I was the one in charge of the deal. Chapter 13. The Sound of Silence. The facility was a masterpiece of steel and high-end turf, tucked away in a converted warehouse I owned on the edge of the industrial district. It was private, soundproof, and at 6 in the evening, completely empty. I was already there when the heavy security gate buzzed. I had traded my emerald silk for black athletic leggings and a fitted long-sleeve tech shirt. My hair was tied back, so tight it felt like a helmet. I was ready for a battle of wills. Rowan walked in carrying her equipment bag over one shoulder. She stopped dead the moment the door hissed shut behind her. She looked at the sprawling, pristine indoor diamond, then at the high-tech hitting sensors, and finally at me. "What is this?" she asked, her voice echoing off the rafters. "The location for our first session," I said, leaning against the batting cage frame. "I have a field, Alina. A public field where there are people and rules and dust and distractions and eyes," I interrupted, stepping onto the turf. I could feel the electricity between us the moment I closed the gap. It was a physical weight in the air. "I paid $100,000 for your time, Rowan. I didn't pay for the privilege of sitting on a wooden bench in a park. I paid for this. Privacy." Rowan's jaw tightened, a muscle jumping in her cheek. She dropped her bag with a heavy thud. "Privacy is dangerous for people like us." "Only if you don't have discipline," I countered, throwing her own words from the office back at her. "Now, are you going to coach, or are you going to stand there and argue about real estate?" For a long beat, she just stared at me. Her storm gray eyes were dark, searching my face for any mention of the balcony, any hint of the way her mouth had felt against mine. I gave her nothing. I was the CEO again. I was in control. "Fine," she snapped, pulling a bat from her bag. "You want to play? Let's see what you've got. Get in the box." The next hour was a grueling exercise in tension. Rowan was a relentless coach. She didn't go easy on me. She made me run drills until my lungs burned, her voice barking corrections that felt like lashes of a whip. "Drop your hips. You're standing like you're in a boardroom, not a batter's box." She stepped behind me to correct my stance. I froze as her chest brushed against my back. Her hands, warm and calloused, wrapped around mine on the handle of the bat. "Your grip is too tight," she whispered, her breath ghosting over the shell of my ear. "You're trying to control the bat. You need to let it be an extension of you." The contact was electric. Every nerve ending in my body screamed at the proximity. I could feel the heat radiating from her, the rhythmic strength of her body pressed against mine. We both knew we were dancing on the edge of a cliff. Neither of us mentioned the gala. Neither of us mentioned the kiss. It was a ghost in the room, louder than the sound of the pitching machine. "Like this?" I asked, my voice coming out breathier than I intended. "No," she murmured, her hands sliding up my arms to adjust my shoulders. Her touch lingered a second too long, her thumbs grazing the sensitive skin of my inner elbows. "Relax, Alina. You're wound like a spring." "Maybe I like being wound," I said, turning my head slightly. Our faces were inches apart. I could see the sweat beading on her forehead, the intensity in her gaze that had nothing to do with baseball. The air was thick with the unsaid, a heavy, pulsing silence that demanded to be broken. Rowan's eyes dropped to my lips, and for a terrifying second, I thought she was going to drop the bat and finish what we started on the balcony. Her grip on my hands tightened. "Time's up," she said abruptly, stepping back as if the turf had turned to lava. She checked her watch, her movements jerky and forced. That's an hour." "We still have the dinner," I reminded her, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm. It was part of the bid. "I'm not hungry," she snapped, stuffing her gloves into her bag. "The contract says." "To hell with the contract, Alina." Rowan turned on me, her eyes flashing with a mix of fear and desire. You can't buy everything. You can't buy a way out of the fact that we shouldn't be doing this. I have a team. I have a life. And you're a blizzard. You're going to destroy everything in your path just because you want to see if you can. Is that what you think this is? A test of power. I walked toward her, my own temper flaring. You're the one who quoted Williamson, Rowan. You're the one who talked about not playing small. So why are you shrinking now? Rowan grabbed her bag and headed for the door without looking back. Because I know what happens when the light goes out, Alina. And I'm not ready to be left in the dark again. The security door hissed shut, leaving me standing in the center of my perfect, private diamond. I was alone, exhausted, and more obsessed with her than ever. She was running. But she forgot one thing about people like me. I love the chase. Chapter 14. The Diamond Table. The east side field was quiet, the sprinklers having just finished their cycle. Rowan was alone in the dugout, meticulously organizing a bucket of scuffed baseballs, her nightly ritual of winding down. The floodlights were dimmed to a soft haze, casting long, dramatic shadows across the pitcher's mound. Then the fleet arrived. 3 black vans pulled onto the grass behind the backstop. Rowan stood up, her hand tightening around a bat, her eyes narrowing as a team of 4 men in crisp white uniforms hopped out. With the synchronized efficiency of a pit crew, they unloaded a heavy mahogany table, 2 velvet-lined chairs, and a floor-length white silk tablecloth. Rowan marched out of the dugout just as they were placing a centerpiece of white orchids and crystal stemware in the dead center of the infield. What the hell is this? Rowan barked, her voice echoing in the empty stadium. Who authorized? I did, I said, stepping out from behind the vans. I had traded my athletic gear for a sleek, cream-colored silk jumpsuit. I looked like a ghost against the dark grass. I walked to the table as the catering staff laid out silver platters of seared scallops and a chilled bottle of Krug. Alina, you can't be serious, Rowan hissed, stalking toward me. She was back in her dirt-stained coach, hoodie and shorts, looking like an angry street fighter who had stumbled into a Michelin star restaurant. This is a public park. My players practice here. You can't just colonize the pitcher's mound with fine china. I didn't answer. I gestured for the staff to leave. They bowed slightly and retreated to the vans, disappearing into the night as quickly as they'd arrived. The only sounds left were the crickets and the soft pop of the cork as I opened the champagne. I sat down in one of the velvet chairs, the fine silk of my jumpsuit rustling. I poured a pale, bubbling gold into the crystal glass and looked up at her. Rowan was standing 5 feet away, her arms crossed, her jaw set in a line of pure defiance. She looked like a statue of a vengeful god. I have a contract that says I am owed a dinner hosted by you, I said, my voice smooth and unwavering. Since you were so adamant about not leaving your field, I brought the dinner to you. I told you I wasn't hungry. And I told you I don't like to repeat myself. I took a slow, deliberate sip of the champagne, the bubbles sharp on my tongue. I gestured to the empty chair across from me. Now, I can sit here and do this on my own while you stand there like a statue, or you can sit down like a decent human being and we can get this dinner over with. Rowan stared at me. The silence stretched, heavy with the weight of the night and the memory of the kiss she was still trying to pretend hadn't happened. For a moment, I thought she might actually walk away. Then, with a low, frustrated growl, she kicked a clump of dirt off her sneaker and pulled out the chair. The velvet looked ridiculous against her hoodie, but she sat anyway, her knees nearly touching mine under the small table. You are the most arrogant, infuriating woman I have ever met, she muttered, staring at the silver fork like it was a foreign object. And you are the most stubborn person I've ever had the displeasure of negotiating with, I countered, sliding the second glass of champagne toward her. Drink. It cost more than the uniforms you're so worried about. Rowan picked up the glass, her fingers brushing mine for a fleeting, electric second. She didn't pull away immediately. She looked at me over the rim of the crystal, her storm gray eyes reflecting the moonlight. Is this how you win every battle, Alina? You just outspend the opposition until they're too tired to fight. No, I whispered, leaning in across the orchids. I only do this when the opposition is worth the effort. The air between us charged, the Ice Queen and the coach finally stripped of their armor, sitting in the middle of a dirt field surrounded by luxury and a silence that was about to break. Chapter 15. Walls Come Down. The scallops sat untouched on the silver platters as the champagne did the work I couldn't. It softened the hard edges of Rowan's silhouette. She took a second, longer sip, finally leaning back into the velvet. The sight of a world-class athlete in a stained hoodie, sitting in a velvet chair in the middle of a baseball diamond, was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. You don't do anything halfway, do you? Rowan asked, her voice losing its jagged edge. Efficiency is doing things halfway. Excellence is doing them completely, I replied. And I have no interest in being efficient with you, Rowan. She looked away, her gaze drifting toward the darkened bleachers. That's the problem. Everything is a project for you. A goal. But people aren't spreadsheets, Alina. You can't just optimize a life and expect it not to break. Is that what happened? I asked softly, risking a step into the minefield. Someone tried to optimize you? Rowan's thumb traced the rim of her crystal glass. For a moment, the sounds of the night seemed to fade, leaving only the low hum of the city in the distance. I was in Chicago, she said, her voice barely a whisper. I had a life there. A career in the big leagues, a home, and a woman I thought was my anchor. She was like you, powerful, ambitious, used to getting her way. But when the pressure of my job got too loud, when the scandals of the sports world started to touch her polished reputation, she didn't just leave. She erased me. I was a distraction she couldn't afford. She let out a dry, bitter laugh. I left everything. I packed a bag, drove until I hit the coast, and ended up here, coaching kids who don't care about my resume as long as I can teach them how to hit a curveball. I moved to LA to be invisible, Alina. Not to be someone's $100,000 curiosity. The vulnerability in her voice was a physical ache in my chest. I reached across the silk tablecloth, my hand hovering near hers. Rowan, I'm not her. I don't erase the things I care about. The moment I spoke, the wall went back up. It was like watching a vault door slam shut. Rowan's eyes snapped back to mine, the warmth vanishing as quickly as it had appeared. She pulled her hand back, tucking it into the pocket of her hoodie. It doesn't matter, she said, her voice turning clinical and cold. The point is, the light always goes out eventually. And I'm not interested in being the one left holding the bill when you decide you're done playing baseball. I'm not playing, I argued, but the bridge was gone. The rest of the dinner was a masterclass in surface-level pleasantries. We talked about the regional qualifiers. We talked about the cost of synthetic turf versus natural grass. We spoke about everything and nothing, two people sitting inches apart while miles of history stretched between us. The electricity was still there, but it was suppressed, humming under the floorboards like a live wire hidden in a wall. When the last course was finished, Rowan stood up. The charm of the moonlit dinner had evaporated, replaced by the rigid discipline of the coach. Thank you for the meal, Miss Starkov, she said, her tone professional enough to make my teeth ache. She looked at the mahogany table, the orchids, and the crystal, then back at me. It was illuminating. I stood up, the cream silk of my jumpsuit feeling suddenly too formal, too out of place. Rowan, get the field cleaned up, Alina, she interrupted, already turning toward the dugout. The junior varsity has the early slot at 6 a.m. I want this dirt looking like a diamond again before the sun comes up. Not a trace of whatever this was. She disappeared into the shadows of the dugout without a backward glance. I stood alone on the pitcher's mound, the cold champagne sitting heavy in my stomach. I had spent a fortune to get her to sit down, and all I had managed to do was remind her why she wanted to stay standing. Chapter 16. The Digital Ghost. The field was clean. By 5 a.m., the mahogany table was gone, the orchid petals were swept away, and the dirt was raked to a professional sheen. But the silence in my penthouse felt like a taunt. I was a distraction she couldn't afford. Rowan's words looped in my mind like a corrupted file. I sat at my workstation, 3 curved monitors that usually displayed global market fluctuations and encryption codes. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I knew the ethics of what I was about to do were questionable, but as a CEO, I had never cared about the rules when a deal was on the line. And Rowan Griffiths was the most important deal of my life. "Sarah," I said into my headset, my voice cold and focused. "I need a deep dive file on Coach Rowan Griffiths. Specifically her time in Chicago. I want names of associates, partners, and any legal NDAs she might have signed. And I want it yesterday." "On it, Ms. Starkov. Do you want the corporate filter or the thorough search?" "Thorough," I hissed. "Find the woman who broke her." The deep dive. 2 hours later, a secure file appeared on my center monitor. I scrolled through the data, my eyes scanning the digital skeleton of Rowan's past. There it was. 5 years ago. Rowan had been the youngest assistant coach in the history of the Chicago professional circuit. She was a rising star, a woman breaking glass ceilings in a male-dominated sport. Then I found the anchor. Vivian Vance. A high-profile political strategist with sights set on the governor's office. I recognized the name. She was a shark, a woman who traded in optics and public perception. I opened a series of archived news articles. There had been a minor gambling scandal involving one of the players on Rowan's team. Rowan had done the right thing. She had reported it, stood by her integrity, and faced the press. But the press had been relentless, digging into her private life. They'd found out about her relationship with Vivian. I found a leaked internal memo from Vance's campaign team. The association with the sports scandal is a liability. The relationship must be terminated to protect the candidate's path to office. Rowan hadn't been fired by the team. She had been discarded by the woman she loved because she was bad for the brand. I stared at the screen, the blue light reflecting in my eyes. Vivian Vance looked a lot like me, power suits, sharp jawlines, a penchant for control. No wonder Rowan looked at me like I was a ticking time bomb. To her, I wasn't just a lover. I was a repeat of her greatest tragedy. A sudden notification popped up on my screen. It was a calendar alert for the team's semifinal game. Tonight. I closed the windows, my heart feeling like a lead weight. I had the information I wanted, but it felt like a theft. I knew her secret, her pain, and the exact shape of her scars. I pushed away from the desk, the Ice Queen feeling more like a villain than a hero. I had used my empire to spy on her soul, and now I had to go to the field and pretend I didn't know why she was so afraid of me. I checked my reflection in the darkened monitor. "What have you done, Alina?" I whispered. I grabbed my keys. It was time for the game. But as I headed for the elevator, I knew that if Rowan ever found out about this file, the light wouldn't just go out. She'd burn the whole world down to get away from me. Chapter 17. The Softening. The semifinal game brought a different kind of electricity to the air, one that wasn't just about the championship. The stands were packed, the smell of popcorn and cut grass was heavy, and for the first time, I didn't care who saw me watching her. I had arrived early, but I didn't take my usual seat near Melina. I stood by the fence, close enough to the dugout to see the way Rowan's jaw worked as she studied the opposing pitcher. I didn't look at her like a CEO looking at an investment anymore. I looked at her like a woman who had seen the blueprint of her heart and realized how much it had cost her to survive. The game was a defensive stalemate. Rowan was in her element, pacing the dirt like a caged panther, but there was a weariness in her eyes that I hadn't noticed before. Knowing about Chicago, about Vivian Vance, changed the way I saw every movement she made. In the 4th inning, Marcus took a hard slide into second base. He stayed down for a second too long, clutching his ankle. The crowd went silent. Rowan was on the field before the umpire could even signal. She didn't bark at him to get up. She knelt in the dirt, her hands, the ones that had held mine with such terrifying strength, now incredibly gentle as she checked his leg. I felt a lump in my throat. This wasn't a badass coach protecting an asset. This was a woman who gave everything to these kids because she knew exactly what it felt like to be discarded. When Marcus eventually hobbled off the field to a round of applause, Rowan stayed by the dugout, her head bowed for a split second. I walked toward her, ignoring the curious glances from the other parents. "He's going to be fine, Rowan," I said softly, standing just on the other side of the chain-link fence. She looked up, startled. Usually, she would have a quip ready, a sharp reminder about the no fraternizing policy. But today, her guard was frayed. "He's a tough kid," she murmured, wiping a smudge of dirt from her forehead. She looked at me, and I didn't give her the ice queen. I gave her a small, genuine smile, the kind I usually reserved for Melina. "You're a good coach, but you're a better person, Rowan. I hope you know that." She blinked, the storm in her eyes settling into something calm and confused. "Alina, what are you doing?" "I'm acknowledging the woman beneath the whistle," I said. I reached out and briefly, daringly, rested my hand on the wire fence near hers. I wasn't trying to buy her time or dominate the space. I was just there. "I'll have my private doctor check on Marcus after the game. It's handled. Focus on the win." She didn't pull away. She looked at my hand, then back at my face. The cold, calculated distance that had defined us was being replaced by a terrifyingly soft warmth. "Why are you being so nice to me?" she whispered. "I was a jerk to you on the field the other night." "Because I realized that some walls aren't built to keep people out," I said, my voice thick with a secret I couldn't tell her yet. "They're built to keep the person inside safe. I'm not here to tear your wall down anymore, Rowan. I'm just going to stand by the gate until you decide to open it." The umpire called for the next play. Rowan took a breath, her posture straightening, but the look she gave me wasn't one of defiance. It was a look of profound, silent recognition. "Go sit down, Starkov," she said, though there was no bite in it. "We have a game to win." The aftermath. The East Side team won on a walk-off hit in the bottom of the ninth. The celebration was deafening, but amidst the chaos of cheering parents and jumping teenagers, Rowan and I found each other's eyes across the diamond. I didn't rush the field. I didn't make a scene. I just nodded to her, a silent, respectful salute. As I headed to my car, Melina caught up with me. She was glowing from the win, but she was looking at me with narrowed eyes. "You're different today," Melina noted, her voice uncharacteristically quiet. "You weren't drooling. You were looking at her. Like you actually see her." "I do see her, Melina," I said, opening my car door. "And I think for the first time, she's starting to see me too." Chapter 18. The calm before the championship. The days leading up to the finals were a study in quiet transformation. I continued to operate Starkov Industries with my usual lethal precision, but the ice blizzard had been replaced by something far more dangerous, a calm, steady warmth. I stopped sending aggressive texts about equipment and instead sent brief, thoughtful notes. "Marcus's ankle is 100%. My doctor says he's clear for the full 9 innings. Rest up, coach. No demands. No power plays. Just support." For Rowan, the silence was louder than the shouting. Rowan sat in her darkened living room, the city of Los Angeles a sprawling grid of neon outside her window. She had a scouting report on the opposing team in her lap, but she hadn't turned a page in 20 minutes. Her mind was a chaotic replay of Alina at the fence. The CEO hadn't been wearing her Ice Queen armor that day. She'd looked human. The way she'd smiled, not the sharp, predatory smirk of a billionaire, but something soft and genuine, was eating away at Rowan's resolve. She was waiting for the catch. She was waiting for the moment Alina would demand a return on her investment, or pull a Vivian Vance move and disappear when things got complicated. But the catch never came. Rowan picked up her phone, scrolling through the short, respectful texts from Alina. "What are you playing at, Starkov?" she whispered to the empty room. She was used to people wanting something from her talent, her time, her silence. But Alina was suddenly standing by the gate, just like she'd said, waiting. It was more terrifying than the $100,000 bid. It was a siege of kindness, and Rowan's walls weren't designed to keep out a friend. The day of the finals. The championship game was held at the professional stadium downtown, a sea of emerald green and dirt under the blinding midday sun. The air was thick with the scent of hot dogs and the high-pitched hum of 1,000 nervous fans. I arrived in a simple white dress, sunglasses on, sitting in the front row. I wasn't there as a donor. I was there as a godmother. Rowan was already on the field. When she saw me, she didn't look away. She didn't scowl. She gave me a single, slow nod, a silent acknowledgement that the world had shifted. The game was a nail-biter. By the bottom of the ninth, the score was tied. The tension in the stadium was a physical weight. Marcus was at bat with 2 outs and a runner on third. The entire season came down to this. I looked at Rowan in the dugout. She wasn't yelling. She was leaning against the railing, her eyes fixed on Marcus. She looked calm, but I could see the way her hand gripped the wood until her knuckles were white. She was terrified for him, not because of the win, but because she knew how much it meant to him. Marcus swung. The crack of the bat was the loudest thing I had ever heard. The ball soared, a white speck against the blue sky, clearing the outfield fence by a mile. The stadium erupted. A walk-off home run. Amidst the screaming fans and the team swarming Marcus at home plate, I didn't look at the ball. I looked at Rowan. She was standing perfectly still, a single tear tracking through the dirt on her cheek. She looked liberated. I stayed in my seat as the crowd began to filter down toward the field. I waited until the chaos had settled, until the boys were busy with their trophies and the parents were distracted by photos. Rowan was standing near the pitcher's mound, looking at the empty diamond. The high of the win was fading, replaced by that heavy, guarded silence. I walked onto the field, my heels sinking slightly into the dirt. I didn't say anything. I just stood next to her. "We did it," she whispered, her voice thick. "You did it, Rowan," I corrected. "You taught them how to be powerful beyond measure." She turned to me, and for the first time, she didn't look for the gate or the wall. She just looked at me. "Why did you change, Alina? After that dinner, you stopped pushing. Why?" I looked at the woman who had lost everything in Chicago and built a life out of dirt and grit. I wanted to tell her I knew about Vivian. I wanted to tell her I knew why she was afraid. But instead, I reached out and tucked a stray honey blonde hair behind her ear. "Because I realized that the most valuable thing about you isn't your time, Rowan," I said softly. "It's your trust. And that's something I can't buy. I have to earn it." Rowan's breath hitched. She didn't pull away. She leaned into my touch, her forehead resting against mine. The no fraternizing rule was dead. The Ice Queen was gone. "You're a very expensive habit, Starkov," she breathed, her hands finding my waist. "I'm an investment," I whispered, echoing our first real fight. And I think it's time we both started seeing the returns. Chapter 19. Ghosts from the Past. The atmosphere of the championship victory was still humming in the air when the ghost finally arrived to haunt the present. I had come to the field to surprise Rowan with a quiet celebration, no catering teams, no mahogany tables, just me and a bottle of the water she liked. But as I rounded the corner of the equipment shed, my world went from a warm thaw back to a sub-zero freeze. Rowan was standing by the dugout. And she wasn't alone. Standing across from her was a woman who could have been my own reflection. Vivian Vance. She was dressed in a charcoal power suit that screamed political ambition, her dark hair pulled back in a sharp, unforgiving knot. She looked exactly like the file Sarah had sent me, polished, cold, and calculated. I stopped dead 20 feet away, my heart dropping into my stomach. I didn't approach. I couldn't. I just stood there, a silent witness to Rowan's greatest nightmare. Vivian was talking, her expression intense, her hand resting firmly on Rowan's arm. It wasn't a casual touch, it was a possessive one. "And I'm back and I still own this" gesture. Rowan looked paralyzed. Her posture was rigid, her face pale. From where I stood, it looked like the walls hadn't just gone back up, the entire fortress was collapsing under the weight of the past. Vivian leaned in, whispering something, her fingers tightening on Rowan's bicep. I felt a surge of cold fury, but I stayed still. I wouldn't be the billionaire who barged in to save her. Rowan had to choose. Then, Rowan's eyes shifted. She looked past Vivian's shoulder and saw me. For a heartbeat, the fear in her eyes was replaced by a raw, desperate clarity. She looked at me, the woman who had sat in the dirt, who had waited at the gate, who had seen her scars and stayed anyway. Rowan didn't say a word to me. Instead, she turned back to Vivian. She said something short and sharp, a finality that made Vivian's hand drop as if she'd been burned. Vivian's mouth opened in shock, her strategic mask finally slipping. Rowan didn't wait for a rebuttal. She turned her back on the ghost of Chicago and walked toward me. She didn't walk, she marched. Every step was a reclamation of her life. When she reached me, she didn't hesitate. She didn't check for witnesses or worry about the league's policies. She grabbed the lapels of my white dress and pulled me into her. The kiss wasn't like the one on the balcony. It wasn't a lapse in judgment. It was a declaration. It was long, deep, and devastatingly certain. She tasted like the end of a long war. Her hands moved to my hair, holding me as if I were the only thing keeping her grounded in the present. I wrapped my arms around her neck, pulling her closer, letting the emerald heat of my own feelings burn away the last of the Chicago frost. Behind her, I saw Vivian Vance standing alone in the dirt, realizing she was no longer the most powerful woman in the room. Rowan finally pulled back just an inch, her forehead resting against mine. Her breath was hitched, her eyes shimmering with a mix of relief and defiance. "She's gone, Alina," Rowan whispered, her voice a low, beautiful vibration. "I'm not in the dark anymore." I looked at the woman who had finally decided to be powerful beyond measure. "I told you, Rowan. I'm not an investment. I'm a forever." Rowan smiled, a real, unfiltered smile that reached her eyes and kissed me again, right there in the middle of the diamond, where the light was never going to go out. Chapter 20. Home Advantage. 6 months later. The Starkov penthouse was no longer a tomb of glass and silence. There was a pair of scuffed sneakers by the marble entryway, a whistle on the kitchen island, and the faint, lingering scent of the outdoors. I stood on the balcony, watching the sunset paint the Los Angeles skyline in hues of bruised purple and gold. I wasn't looking at the markets. I wasn't checking my emails. I was waiting for the sound of the elevator. When the doors chimed, I didn't turn around. I felt her presence before I heard her, the steady, grounding energy that had become my North Star. "You're home late," I said, a smile tugging at my lips as a pair of strong arms wrapped around my waist from behind. "Extra batting practice," Rowan murmured, her face pressing into the crook of my neck. "Marcus is determined to hit another walk-off in the spring." I leaned back into her, letting the warmth of her body anchor me. "Is that the only reason? Or were you avoiding the fundraising committee meeting?" "A little of both," she admitted with a low chuckle. "Melina is still trying to get us to host the winter gala here. She says the Ice Queen's Palace has better acoustics for a silent auction. She's never going to let that go, is she?" "Never." Rowan turned me in her arms, her storm gray eyes soft and clear. There was no shadow of Chicago in them anymore. No fear of the light. But I think she's just happy she doesn't have to keep our secrets anymore. I reached up, my thumb tracing the line of her jaw. "Rowan, that day at the field, when Vivian showed up. I've always wondered, did you choose me because she was the past, or because I was the future?" Rowan's expression turned serious, her hands tightening on my waist. She didn't hesitate. "I didn't choose you because I was desperate, Alina. I chose you because for the first time in 5 years, I didn't feel like I had to shrink to fit into someone else's world. You didn't try to change my dirt to silk. You just sat in the dirt with me. She leaned down, her forehead resting against mine. Vivian was the darkness I thought I deserved, she whispered. You're the light I never thought I'd be brilliant enough to have. I pulled her into a kiss, not a frantic one, but a slow, certain promise. We weren't a CEO and a coach anymore. We weren't an investment or a distraction. We were two women who had stopped playing small and started being powerful together. The gala is in 3 weeks, I said against her lips. Emerald silk or midnight black? Rowan grinned, that sharp, beautiful look that always made my heart skip. Let's give them both, Starkov. Let them watch the blizzard and the storm finally settle. The light didn't go out. It just got brighter. Epilogue, beyond measure. The first year of us wasn't built on grand gestures or $100,000 checks. It was built in the early mornings when the sun was just a sliver on the horizon. I learned to trade my black coffee and morning market reports for a pair of running shoes and the sound of Rowan's breathing next to mine. She didn't ask me to stop being a CEO, but she taught me how to leave the Ice Queen at the door. The merger can wait an hour, Alina, she'd say, tugging the laptop from my hands on a Tuesday evening. The world won't stop spinning if you watch the sunset with me. And for the first time in my life, I believed her. I made sure she never felt like an accessory to my life. When I was invited to the Silicon Valley summits or the galas in Paris, I didn't just bring her as my plus one. I introduced her as the woman who kept my feet on the ground. At a high-stakes dinner in Davos, I watched a senator try to talk over her, and I stepped in not to fight her battle, but to clear the floor. Coach Griffiths has a more successful win rate with high-pressure talent than anyone in this room, I told the table, my hand resting firmly on Rowan's shoulder. I suggest you listen to her. Rowan hadn't shrunk. She had expanded. With my backing and her brilliance, she opened a nonprofit athletic center for underprivileged youth, a state-of-the-art facility where she was the boss, the visionary, and the heart. I was just the silent partner, the one who made sure the lights stayed on and the legalities were airtight. The new normal. One rainy Sunday, we were curled up on the oversized velvet sofa in the penthouse. There were no suits, no silken jumpsuits, and no branding. Just Rowan in a worn-out hoodie and me in one of her old t-shirts. You've been home 4 weekends in a row, Rowan noted, tracing the line of my palm with her thumb. Is the empire collapsing without its queen? The empire is fine, I murmured, leaning my head on her shoulder. I promoted Sarah. She's more than capable of handling the ice blizzard duties while I'm busy. Busy doing what? Being happy, I said, and the word didn't feel foreign anymore. Learning that I don't have to be cold to be powerful. Rowan pulled me closer, the scent of rain and home surrounding us. You were never cold, Alina. You were just waiting for someone who wasn't afraid of the frost. We had built a foundation that didn't rely on the heights of my towers or the grid of her fields. We had built it on the simple, radical act of seeing each other, not for what we could do, but for who we were when the world wasn't watching. The Ice Queen had been dethroned, and in her place was a woman who knew that the greatest investment she ever made wasn't in a company, but in the person who taught her how to breathe. Thank you so much for listening. Please subscribe and like this video and follow me for more stories. You are always welcome here, and leave me a comment or a thumbs up, just letting me know if you like the story and would like more, or is there perhaps an idea that you would like to share or let me write for you.